my name is Michael Brown. I'm a co-editor of The Deal, which is a subsidiary of The Street. I have today with me, from left to right, David Dancer, CMO of MedMen. Bethany Gomez, Director of Research at Brightfield Group. They do consumer and market trends for the cannabis industry. And Jeff Stein of Consumer Research around cannabis, which is, I think, a pretty self-explanatory.
That's why we named it that.
There we go. There we go. So as Deborah mentioned, we're going to talk about the cannabis consumer, the economics of. So I really wanted to, sort of get each of the panelists to kind of, draw out who they think the sort of typical cannabis consumer is, how those profiles have sort of changed over the years. So, Jeff, I think we've talked about the atypical cannabis consumer over the years and how that's sort of changing. Who do you sort of see as, or what do you think is the sort of typical profile, and sort of how does that differ over different demographics and that?
Well, it's definitely the millennial. It's definitely an 18 to 34, 18 to 40 thing. But as we see different markets, it's remarkable what we see from LA to Boston to Denver to Phoenix, and also has a lot to do with where they are in the evolution of the legality of it. Mm-hmm. So I was looking at the Boston data that just came out for us just a few weeks ago, and I was astounded at the amount of 50 plus who were for both medicinal and legal, a number that I'd not seen in any other market that is close to being. So it really changes from market to market. That's what's most interesting about it.
Yeah. I mean, Bethany, what do you sort of
I mean, I would agree that it's been very interesting to watch the profile of the average consumer evolving. I think, there's a lot of discussion about new consumer groups that are coming out, and that's, really what is making the industry more polished. You're seeing a lot more, focus today. We'll, talk about some of the personas we pulled out on what we call boomerangs, which are, people who are in their 50s and 60s who smoked pot in their youth and are coming back to it now for all of their medicinal purposes and aches and pains and things like that. Moms, dads, people who are white collar professionals. But, we also don't want to lose sight of the fact that the core group of, of cannabis consumers is, and the heaviest users who spend the most are the ones who have been doing it since the black market, and are, do use in cannabis as a absolutely ingrained part of their identity, of their life, and it carries through to, to all aspects of what they do, and that's, really separates this industry from, a typical good. Right?
Yeah. And we talked about in the green room about, sort of people being intimidated by the industry. People, I think the legacy user, if you will, is probably not so intimidated to walk into a dispensary and pick out, a concentrate versus a flower versus an edible, but an older demographic maybe. David, what are you guys kind of doing to make that more accessible for those folks?
Yeah, I think you're right. From our perspective, we see high transaction volume with customers between the age of 25 to 35, but we also see a lot of transaction coming from that 55 plus, also spending more in the store. And so we need to ensure that the retail experience at MedMen, as many of you are probably familiar with, from the street, it's accessible, it's open, it's visible, it's clear that it's a cannabis retail dispensary, but also we have to be mindful in the store to make sure that we can meet the needs of all those customers. So that 25 to 35 segment may have a more recreational slant, but that 55-year plus customer also needs to be able to come in and feel comfortable and explore. So you've seen the technology that we have in the stores. Sure. iPads, interactive devices, data, cannabis education and insights, as well as trained sales associates who can guide customers through their questions, give them information on products. Certainly a little bit of a different experience in a medical market versus a recreational, but we work really hard to ensure that that retail experience mirrors a typical retail experience that consumers are used to having at other premium retail venues.
Absolutely. And do you see, is there a certain type of, certain product that certain age ranges are going after, or, is it, is an older customer looking for something that's maybe, in a pill form or something that you can ingest, or topical that's, maybe not smoking a joint, or?
Yeah, I think, and in the white paper, it certainly opens with and provides some data around this, and I think that the trend is flower sales going down, still the predominant top seller in the environment, but the concentrates and the edibles are we are seeing a huge level of interest in that area. And especially, one of the other insights from the white paper is, of those that are cannabis curious, while the typical customer has been a male, of the cannabis curious, you see that kind of leveling off to 50-50. So 50% of the cannabis curious are women.
Yeah.
So we see that the female segment within our stores are going over towards those edibles, the concentrate, the topicals, the more wellness-focused products.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no question in the market research that we do that women are coming up when you get away from flower. That's absolutely true. And I think Bethany made a great point of 50 plus is a real opportunity. These are people who probably utilized cannabis as younger people, got away with it, got away from it as they got older, had kids, had family, had business, and want to come back into the marketplace. And I think that's, I live in Florida, and I think that's one of the biggest opportunities there is.
I mean, definitely we're seeing segmentation between what products people are consuming based off of age group and consumer segment. And older consumers are definitely pushing into the topical segment. That's really key for, as people get older, they have more aches and pains, things like that. It's definitely popular with topicals are popular with other consumer groups also, but that's a differentiator. Millennials definitely tend towards more vaping. That's a growing segment. Edibles are more popular with Gen Xers and baby boomers, older generations. And also it's just interesting to see based off of people's tobacco consumption also. If people are smoking cigarettes, they're more willing to smoke flower. If people are very much anti-smoking and they don't want to smoke, are very against smoking tobacco, then they are going to be less willing to try flower, especially if they're coming back to the market or are new to the market.
You mentioned the report in there. We mentioned 3 or 4 different sort of demographics. The boomerangs, like you said, the divorced dads was a group of
My
that
newest
demo.
one is soccer grandma.
Is that what you got? Okay, that's not bad. That's not bad. Microdosing mamas was the other. So, I'm curious if you guys could talk a little bit about, get a little bit more deep into that, and sort of, we talked about the older or aging woman and sort of, their preference to get away from the flower. But I mean, the divorced dad, the boomerang. I mean, do they have a preference in sort of what they're shopping for?
I mean, moms in particular, and women in general, but moms in particular, who are using, in smaller dosages, particularly in recreational markets as they've started to evolve a bit more, right? They're looking a lot more. This shouldn't surprise anyone. Looking a lot more towards chocolates, or those like the Kiva style chocolates, the Des Françaises, the Grune chocolate, and Oregon, they really target those women, those moms that are wanting to have their indulgence and swap out for a glass of wine at the end of the day, or just a little puff of a vape pen, to get them through toddler meltdowns and all of the challenges that come with momming, right?
Yeah.
But it's important that it's discreet, and it's important that you can't go pick up your kids from preschool smelling like cannabis, even in California or Oregon. That's not not something that you want to bring on yourself, even if it's becoming less stigmatized. Discretion is absolutely crucial, and and products that people like to consume, right? People like to consume chocolate. Women like to consume chocolates, especially if they can actually taste good, and they like to vape.
Yeah, it's interesting. The report sort of talks a little bit about how the divorced dads is the largest. They sort of consume the most on a per gram basis, I believe it was. But the mothers and sort of the more high end users, they're obviously spending, I think, a little bit more money. Do you see that? And I guess sort of David, if you wouldn't mind sort of talking a little bit more about kind of how you market to those higher end consumers, or sort of what the sort of breakdown of marketing is.
Yeah, and staying on the sort of 40 plus female market, we, there's a great need for education.
Yeah.
So how might I use cannabis? What might the benefits be of cannabis? So 2 things that we have focused on is getting that message out there through different vehicles. So we have a magazine called Ember that we create in partnership with Paper Magazine. On the cover of this current issue is Lake Bell, a mom who tells her story about how she uses cannabis in her sort of day-to-day life. So showing story, and as many of you have seen our stoner campaign, sort of building on that idea of breaking down the stereotype around who uses cannabis. We also did a partnership earlier this year with Goop and Gwyneth Paltrow. She did a summit in Los Angeles called In Goop Health, and we hosted a panel with her and brought in various product partners of ours, Papa and Barkley and Bebo and others. And again, starting with education, talking about product utility and function, and then talking about the ease of accessibility. I mean, I've been with the company 90 days, and I've brought a lot of my 40-plus-year-old female friends into the store who just, after the experience that we provide, have said, I wish I would have known this beforehand. I would be in here buying this all the time. I'm now addicted to the balm from Papa and Barkley or what have you. And so being able to get that message out that it's legal is still a message, it's accessible, these are some of the uses, and there are environments that are welcoming and accessible for you to go buy that product.
Now, Jeff, I mean, do you get a sense of how long do these things take to sort of take effect, or how long do the marketing campaigns, I mean, how long does it take for a market to, in your sense, to be mature or, used to sort of the,
well,
business?
For right now, it's difficult because you can't use traditional media for the most part.
Yeah.
We have part of our service is that we have a huge media data segment where we can tell you how people are using media, those who use a lot of edibles or flowers, or what demographics they are, what income or lifestyle. But right now, you can't really utilize that. You can use it on the digital side.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. We were talking backstage. It starts, I think, with the doctors. Getting the physicians to buy into it. And it's been slow, probably because of the pharmaceutical companies out there, but that's the challenge, is getting doctors to buy into it and telling their patients about it.
And on the media side, just to build on that, is, for example, in Los Angeles, our hometown and where we have a strong presence, you start with a billboard inventory of 50,000 billboards. Of those, you go down to 10% of them are in an area that you're even willing to buy based on the need that you have to promote, in our case, our stores. And then once you layer on the regulatory and compliance issues, you're down to about 1% of inventory in Los Angeles that we can even purchase. Yeah. So about 1% of the billboard inventory is even eligible for purpose. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to your question of how long, I think we are actually just now starting to deploy some brand tracking studies for MedMen, so we don't have that data yet. We believe we have a significant amount of equity in the brand in Southern California specifically, but we want to measure that and be able to then build back the ROI against the marketing efforts. But the challenge in media and buying, it's one of the reasons we launched a magazine, so that we can get the word out and we can have distribution of messaging, because our hands are so tied. There's no TV, there's limited audio, folks aren't listening to audio, Spotify doesn't allow it, so we spend, the folks who buy media on my team, probably on a normal, in a non-cannabis industry, they're spending none of their time convincing media to take their money. We are spending probably 75% of our time talking about cannabis, MedMen, our campaign, our messaging, and I think those conversations continue to open the doors across the different media outlets. But I think it's typically a large-scale campaign, you can start to see equity build depending on spend level. I mean, within months, and I think with this hyper-local focus that we have to have. I think we've been effective in Southern California at least, but here in the medical market of New York, it's a much more challenging proposition. We're not going to go do a takeover Manhattan campaign when there's 1,800 prescribing physicians and 70,000 patients. It's probably not a great use of our media dollars. So we're trying to find ways to get to the physicians and educate them, and also get to patients to let them know there's options. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Bethany, do you have any sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, to the initial question of how long it takes a market to mature, I mean, I don't think that any of the markets have matured yet. I mean, we're still very early stages, and you see that, while stigmatization has gone down significantly, and initial wave of destigmatization happens very quickly. In Oregon, from 6 months after the time that recreational comes online, becomes a lot more common to hear professionals say, okay, I'm going to go smoke some weed now, bye, you know, which is you'd never hear immediately before that or hear moms talk about it. But you see a lot more people entering the market within the first year or two, but I would say we're still very early stages.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at data out of Colorado, even for 2014, 2015 data from National Survey on Drug Use and Mental Health, only 20% of adults are using cannabis. Then, if you compare that to alcohol use, it's 67%. Now, if all of the alc-bev companies that are starting to eye the industry have their way, and put the significant push into cannabis, then we're going to see numbers, far beyond what we have right now. So, I mean, it takes markets some time to mature. It takes typically 18 months from the time a market opens to the time that it's fully ramped up, fully online, and is more of a double-digit growth rate versus a triple-digit growth rate. But we're still very early stages.
Yeah. Jeff, I mean, what kind of data do you guys look at? What kind of data has sort of come out in the industry in, I guess, sort of state by state? I know California obviously is the sort of the home state of it and where we have the most data. But just can you talk about some of the data that you guys look at and
Sure.
how that's evolving?
Well, I think one of the things we look at more than anything is reasons and motivations that people either use cannabis or don't.
Yeah.
Whether it's recreational or medicinal, and we start to see some trends in terms of I don't want to smoke it, or it's not legal, or I'm concerned about where I work, my employment situation. So looking at people's behavioral reasons or not reasons, I think, can be very, very valuable in understanding what direction you need to go.
Does it differ by? Does it differ by market?
It does. It differs by market,
Yeah.
by region. How legal it is. Is it a red state? Is it a blue state? Believe it or not,
fair enough,
that has a lot to do with it. But what you see and within a state can be different. I mean, the great example is Texas. Look at Austin, and you're going to see one thing. Look at Dallas, you're going to see a completely different thing.
Sure.
So those kind of those trends they mirror each other.
Yeah. I'd love to sort of talk a little bit more about marketing and education and what you guys are doing at MedMen. David, I think is really interesting, and some of the anecdotes that you were talking about backstage were really interesting. Could you talk a little bit about some more of the education, some more of the maybe some of the differences in being in New York in the medical market, sort of what you've seen so far, and your visit here so far.
Well, like I said, education is a huge part of the marketing strategy today. We had a campaign that launched we have 3 campaigns that have launched all within just this year, so it's all still new. But that first campaign focused on communicating that it was legal.
Yeah.
And so we've moved to the Forget Stoner campaign to now we have a campaign called Cannabis. I'm still running the legal campaign everywhere. So that message is still really important. I heard it from our store on Fifth Avenue near Bryant Park. The team just said, listen, I'm asking them for their input. They're interacting with customers every day. We have a huge amount of traffic coming in the store all the time just asking about, is it legal? How do I get a prescription? Where do I go? So here it's referring and giving advice on where to go to get that prescription. It's also then obviously providing product knowledge and cannabis knowledge of what cannabis can be used for. And then in a recreational state like California, our store experience, I mean, it can be overwhelming. There's hundreds and hundreds of products for a variety of reasons. We're evolving over the last several years. We've hired a new visual merchandising team. We have heat mapping installed in our stores. Where are people spending time? What are they looking? And we're seeing, of course, the edible area is where there's a lot of time being spent. So we, with those iPads that we're known for and referenced to as kind of the Apple Store, those provide really in-depth information, both from us and a cannabis perspective, but also by product. Our product partners provide information so that we have all the details about each product, but then we also overlay that with recommended use and information. So it's a part of our sales training, our sales approach. It's a key part of everything we do in external messaging, but we also still have brand marketing tied to that, so that MedMen is gaining some equity from the efforts that we're doing. And also, even above all of that, doing marketing around sort of advocacy and legalization and ensuring that we're leading and participating in that.
What about doctors? Do you market to doctors?
So that is one of, my visit here to New York, one of the reasons was to start to build out what our strategy will look like over time. And so our pharmacy staff specifically manages a lot of the physician outreach directly. So they have a lot of direct relationships with the prescribing doctors. But here in New York, we can go visit physicians. So we could deploy sales staff, we could deploy folks in the market. So we're sort of evaluating what that looks like and how we might tackle it. Again, New York, 1,800 physicians, how do we target that and build a strategy to connect with those? And how do we grow that 1,800 number so that it's more significant and scalable across the state?
Yeah. Bethany, have you any thoughts on sort of marketing and
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that to say here. One of the biggest challenges that that new users face is that there's this widespread buy-in that marijuana has medicinal value, but nobody knows how to dose it. They don't know what to do with it. So if you're diagnosed with cancer and you want to use cannabis for nausea or for anything like that, you can talk to your doctor about it, but they're not going to say, here, take, 4 puffs of this vape cartridge. They're going to say, okay, here's your prescription for marijuana or your recommendation for marijuana. It's the equivalent of saying, okay, go to CVS and buy medicine. It's like, okay, well, that's helpful. Thank you. And then you walk into a store and there's, hundreds of products and you have no idea what's going to work for your condition, what kind of dosage you can use, what are the good products, what are not the good products. There's so many brands in this market right now. I mean, we track more than 700 brands of just vape pens. So like, how are you supposed to figure out what products you can rely on and how you can use that for you? And most of the time physicians aren't going to tell that to you. So it's putting a lot of responsibility in the hands of a bud tender, right? It's putting a lot of responsibility in the hands of dispensaries to make that approachable and help that build that relationship. And recreational markets are really interesting because a lot of people will buy in recreational markets for medicinal purposes because there's no barrier to entry. I mean, it's not a recreational versus a medical market. It doesn't really matter to a lot of stents in recreational markets. The walls fall down. It's like an OTC, but that doesn't mean you know how to dose it, and you're going to be hesitant to talk to your doctor about it. So that's a key focus that is a real barrier that that dispensaries need to overcome to be able to to scale there. A lot of caregivers and small dispensaries try to work with their patients and things like that. As markets scale, that has a tendency to get lost, but there's a lot more products available. So a model like MedMen's is very effective, I think, in making people feel more comfortable, have more information available on a kiosk, be able to encourage people to do more digging, and here's some more information for you. But that's a real gap that there is in the market right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit. I think we've talked a lot about this already, but I did want to sort of talk about some of the changes and some of the things that we've seen in sort of the modern dispensary and how things have changed a little bit. It's no longer the dimly lit cafe and a canal side sort of thing. It's these are really beautiful stores, right, David? I mean, these are places where you can go and learn a lot. David, what do you think the future of the dispensary looks like? And can you send us to a MedMen location that's in the future?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about the strategy behind the design of our stores, but like I mentioned, it's evolving and we're learning as we now have 8 months worth of data in California. And when you were asking Jeff about research, we're looking at shopper data and we're trying to understand trends and behaviors so that we can then translate that into store design that will allow for that. So some really, these are not breakthrough in retail, but is the store designed by sort of the need state of the product? Is the store designed by product type? How do we utilize technology to engage, and how do we get people into the store? I think the other thing there's a lot of limitation from a retail perspective retail 101 marketing is, have signs on your doors, which we can't do. So there's a lot of challenges for us to make that happen.
Yeah. Jeff, do you get a sense, what does the consumer want to see in a dispensary? I mean, what's the...
Well, I can tell you my first experience in a dispensary was off the Strip in Las Vegas, and I felt like I was in the waiting room of a penitentiary. It was one of the more, it was just not an appealing situation, but I've seen others, and you want to be comfortable in them, but I think how you design them, what products you put on there goes to the demographics of that marketplace and what the trends are. Yeah. And as we talked about earlier, marketing to women, to older women, to soccer grandmoms, things like that. To me, that's the future of the medicinal side of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just to add, I mean, the dispensary scene has had, a reputation of being kind of so seedy and bad for so long that any sort of a professional looking store is a huge step up. We're starting to move beyond that now, I think. I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done, but now, that you can expect to have a professional, approachable store. Now you have to actually target it again towards your consumer group, right? And make sure that that they feel welcome. We found women hate dispensaries. Women hate going to dispensaries. Older people, baby boomers, boomerangs, hate going to dispensaries. They hate it. It's a horrible experience. They, most of the time they feel intimidated. They feel like they're being talked down to by a 20-year-old bud tender. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be seen walking into it. I mean, in California, delivery services have been great, because people can, have a lot more discretion. In new markets, having something be approachable and having it be something that you're not embarrassed to be seen walking into, and you don't feel like you're being talked down to by a 20-year-old is, I think an important part of it. But knowing your consumer group, because you can target, you can target moms and you can target baby boomers, but again, don't forget that core base either too, because the people who spend the most and the people who buy the most are the heavy users.
Right.
So
Well, we've talked about our in-store experience, and I think the other piece, Bethany, to build on what you said, is the other strategy is retail selection and retail location. So Fifth Avenue near Bryant Park, Abbot Kinney in Venice, we're next to, as you say, other dispensaries in the past had been in maybe seedier locations or less desirable locations. So the goal and part of the destigmatization strategy for MedMen is to make this like any other retail experience. So when you're on Abbot Kinney going to grab a Blue Bottle coffee or you're buying Tom's shoes, you can also stop in MedMen and make your purchase. So strategically being where other retail that's accessible and premium is located is another part of the strategy for MedMen.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, guys, I think we've run through a lot of what we wanted to talk about. If we can, I'd like to do a little Q&A with the audience. I think I saw this gentleman in the back with glasses. Yeah.
Two things. First, with regards to destigmatization, we have a long ways to go considering what just happened with Elon Musk. So if we join and then losing billions of dollars, 7% of the market value of Tesla went down because of that, and 2 senior executives left. I mean, we have a very big hurdle to get over. So that's just a statement, and we have time to get to that. But my question to you, David, with regards to brand awareness, how are you seeing sales of MedMen for branded cannabis, chocolates, whatever, as opposed to white label or unbranded? What's the success on branded cannabis?
I don't know if I even have the data to speak to that specifically. I can certainly follow up with you on it. I don't know the differences between those two products in our stores. I've only been here not even 90 days, by the way. So I'm happy to follow up with you on that.
I'd love to hear more if anybody has an answer on that. I'd love to hear about that.
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when we first started looking at the industry in 2015, I think it was over 80% of products were unbranded, right, of edibles, and there were shrink wrapped and made in somebody's kitchen with a label printed off on a home printer and slapped on the top. It's come a long way since then, and right now the vast majority of sales are branded products. Most private label of branded products is developing, but only by it's only profitable. It only makes sense for the largest chains, and there really aren't very many large chains yet, and that's not really where where most dispensary chains should be focusing their attention right now. They have to build out their retail arm. They have to build out their retail experience, and to focus on building products at the same time is splitting attention. So a lot, the vast majority of sales, and I don't have the number off the top of my head, but are coming from branded products at this point, and that's where there is significant push.
I mean, do you think, are people like anticipating the entrance of a big tobacco, do people want that sort of big brand? I mean, what do you think?
I mean, in cannabis, there's been the rumors that Marlboro is going to enter the market any second since 1970, right? I think they're big. I mean, Constellation already made an investment in Canopy, right? All of the alcohol companies are looking at cannabis, 100%. It's not, it's not paranoia. People are looking at the industry. CPG is looking at the industry. They can't come in yet in the U.S., so for operators, thank Jeff Sessions for your time to build up your brand. But they will, of course they will.
Yeah, absolutely.
David, I have a question for you. So the name of your company is MedMen, so it's initially focused on the medicinal side. But there's no real research on efficacy for whether it be style, if it's an edible or vape or strain. How do you train these floor staff? If I come in and say, look, I'm having trouble sleeping, how do they know what to prescribe? Right? It's not a prescription, but how do they know? And then also, because you can't ship product across state, how do you translate that same, hopefully data-driven recommendation across state lines?
So our pharmacy staff leads the input on that training. And then we have a retail operations team that manages all of the training in every one of the locations that's central in Los Angeles. So my colleague that runs that comes from 20 years at Guess, 10 years at True Religion, and has rolled out training and development and sales programs across the network. So the pharmacy team leads the usage, efficacy point of view piece of it.
I'm not trying to go argumentative. I really want to understand, because you can't do research, right? You can't say Gorilla Glue is best for, which by the way, the worst freaking name for anything ever. But like,
Actually,
you can't
it's
say
not.
that this strain is best for this. So how does the pharmacy staff make those determinations?
Yeah, we have a baseline of the different effects and the different uses and the different potential benefits that we have. If you go into the store on Fifth Avenue, we have on every table, it talks a little bit about the differences in products and the use of the products. But yeah, we MedMen don't have research that we have commissioned on efficacy, and I'm not sure if we use other specific research in that, but as trained pharmacists, I think they're giving their point of view on options, and then ultimately it's up to the customer to make that decision. I think given the sort of the complication Bethany talked about, that isn't an exact science of, you need Ambien every 3 nights or whatever it is, it's not the same. So it's definitely an area where I think there's a lot of opportunity. And when I started, one of the first things that I did is we kicked off the brand tracking study. We're doing a deep dive on our customer data. We're commissioning a consumer research study so that we have data in front of us that we can make decisions on. So I think there's just, from a data perspective, I think that's one of the areas, the biggest areas of opportunities for the whole industry, not just MedMen.
Could you share your experience about minority women and men? Is it different from what you're finding, for example, with women, white women?
For consumers?
Yes.
That is one thing that we've seen is for minorities, there's a lot slower of an uptake in willingness to switch into the legal market, which I think is, for obvious reasons. There's, Caucasian, people will feel a lot more comfortable with the idea that they can walk into a dispensary, buy cannabis, walk out with cannabis, and feel comfortable that that they're not going to be persecuted for it, that they're not going to have any engagement with law enforcement. It's not federally legal, right? Cannabis is not federally legal, and so there still is discretion at the hands of law enforcement, and so that is definitely something that that people of color have seen a more of a hesitancy to push into the legal market, and that's that's something that really does need to be addressed. I think is a both from a human rights standpoint, but from a market standpoint. There's a strong market there. Of people who are continuing to buy through the illicit market because they aren't comfortable with that. With walking into a dispensary and purchasing. But it's definitely something that should be addressed.
Our research shows the same thing. When you look at, especially in markets where legal, because we ask questions about, have you purchased from a legal dispensary? Have you purchased from a non-legal dispensary? And when we look at the African Americans, Hispanics, especially in LA, the numbers just go through the roof. For some people call it the illicit market. My friends call it the traditional market. But that's what we see.
Yeah. Over here, the scarf.
So I have a two-part question.
Okay, here we
I hear
go.
a lot about brands, and my question is two questions. First is, because we really don't know the science or don't have a lot of depth of science behind this, how do you see the industry changing as more and more science comes in? I mean, our definition of medical today may become nutraceutical, so where do you see that going? That's the first part. And the second is, as I hear all this about marijuana, I start thinking about my first encounter with alcohol. I had to get really sick before I realized how to modulate what I was getting. Are you doing anything on the behavioral side to help people understand how to test the waters with these brands? And so those are my two questions.
Sure.
Well,
Yeah.
I can take that one, I guess. I think that testing the waters is why regulators have been pushing towards, in a recreational market, having these strict limitations on dosage requirements, right? On, a dose should be 10 milligrams. You see a lot of this start low, go slow. But even 10 milligrams, if you haven't used cannabis before ever, that can knock you, right? But it will knock you a lot less than, 1,000 milligram Corova Black Bar will. So there's, on the edible side, there's more clear dosing, right? So that makes it much more approachable, and I think that's why a lot of boomers and a lot of women and a lot of newbies are flocking to edibles, because it is, you can say this, little Kiva terabyte has 5 milligrams or whatever, and you know what you're getting. With flower, it's a lot trickier, and that's where one of the downsides of flower, is it's harder to know, to dose how much you need to dose, and have it be consistent. But there's, a massive trend in the industry pushing towards controlled dosing and microdosing, and I think that will help people to understand and get a better grip and be able to have control over that dosing. Because, with alcohol, beer typically has this ABV, and you can process this much for this often and be okay. But if this strain versus this strain will have a completely different effect on you, then you can try as much as you want, but even the strains are going to be different in a week. So
People just have to try and see if it works, and then come back and try something else.
they say start low, go slow.
Yeah, it depends on how they want to feel. A lot of people, especially older people who are getting back into it, they like edibles because, as Bethany said, there's this, they can quantify how much it is. I once thought, wow, I'm going to buy this edible. Maybe there's 2 glasses of wine on the bottom corner, because that tells me how I'm going to feel at this dosage, or 1 glass of wine, or 1 shot of tequila.
But what you're saying is that this really isn't scientific; it's anecdotal, right? And that's how people have to experience this and figure out what's right for them.
Well, a THC content is similar to an ABV, right? And so, if I'm consuming 5 milligrams of THC, in this product versus that product is going to have the same effect on me. And just like if I have, the same amount of alcohol, between two different brands, it'll have the same effect on me. The only way I know how, what the right dosage for me is to have one of those. So it is trial and error, and that is one of the challenges, particularly for medical environments, but for recreational too. But that's why, microdosing is definitely the most approachable way to start with the industry.
So the second part of that question, so given what we know today, and given that there's a lot more science maybe in other countries, how do you see medical marijuana changing over time as more and more science comes into what we're doing? And how does that impact the retail distribution side?
We need doctors to have more education because that's where it starts. The average person wants to hear their doctor say, oh, here's a prescription for this kind of cannabis in this dose.
Right, and I think you look at how much more standardized and official things have gotten even over the past 12 months. I mean, as you get the science, you can.
And there is some research that is being done. A year ago, I would have said there was very little, research at all out there. And there's a lot more universities that are looking into it. More what they're looking into, they have to start at the baseline of, this is effective in treating, X, Y, and Z condition, right? It's not even to the point of, this specific product is just cannabis, right, or CBD, or whatever it is effective in treating this condition, and that gives physicians the confidence to be able to recommend it. And I think as more research, much of the research that is being done is more along pharma vein, right? If it can't be done by public universities, it has to be done by private companies. The only people who are going to pay for a clinical trial is a pharma company, and they're not going to do it for a general product. It's going to be more towards very specific products that will come up, and those are much longer term.
I think we have time for one more. I see this guy with his hand up first. I'm going to go with you.
So we talked about a couple of groups that don't like going to dispensaries, being boomers, women in general. I'm working with a couple of groups that are very focused on in-home sales and have had phenomenal metrics. Think Tupperware / Avon parties for cannabis. Incredibly educational. I'm curious, David, your gut reaction, I certainly know how I feel, but your gut reaction, is that something you view as an initial threat, or do you view that as growing the pie and educating people and new potential consumers for you?
I think the latter for sure, and we're definitely looking at other ways, exploring, as you had mentioned earlier, Bethany, exploring delivery options. We currently have in a certain select few stores in Los Angeles. We have online purchase in store with sort of a easy access line to get the product. So there are some people again that are not wanting to go in that store and spend all the time there. So I think I hadn't heard that idea. I love that idea. It's a great way to open up and have dialogue in a really safe environment.
And the metrics have actually been
Yeah.
impressive.
That's great.
Quick, talking about research, there are 24, I'm very involved in Israeli companies, and there are 24 labs that I follow. And there is a lot of data that's starting to come out about pinpointing disease and product, type of product. And I think we should be very aware. We are very restricted in our country, but if you look at what's going on in Israel and Spain and the Czech Republic, there's an extraordinary amount of data that's now beginning to be available to the public. And one last thing, I've been working with Jeff Chen at UCLA Cannabis Initiative, where he's got a new researcher, Ziva Cooper, is coming from Columbia. She's going to have an open lab so that other researchers can use that laboratory. And Jeff just raised $400,000 for that. So if you're interested in research, there's now beginning to be opportunity to gather what's abroad and to make it happen here as well.
Great. I'd like to thank our panel, Michael from the street, and of course David, Jeff, and Bethany. Thank you guys. And we're going to switch over to our next panel.